Well, hello everybody. I am excited to be popping in here. We're going to be doing a live Q&A, mostly addressing some questions on attachment basics today. And so this live Q&A is really in honor of my new 5-day live workshop series opening up next week. It's open now for enrollment. I'll put a link to that in the caption of this video. But it's called Love and Ambition, and it is about romantic communication strategies for professional women who do not want to sacrifice their ambition for love. So stay tuned. I'm going to tell you more about that a little bit later in our event here today. So we're going to be covering a few different questions. The first one is, how do I learn to deal with my insecurities instead of distancing myself? Can insecure attachment styles help develop grit? Is it true that finding a secure partner is really the only way to feel secure? Do you think extreme pickiness when dating is due to avoidant attachment? And how do you know if a problem requires conflict management versus conflict resolution? So all of these are super juicy questions. So let's just dive right in. I've taken a few notes on how I want to respond to these, but as you are joining me here, if you'd like to share some of your own questions, I will also be taking some pauses to answer some questions from people who are here joining me live. So the first question, how do I learn to deal with my insecurities instead of distancing myself? Okay. So this particular person asked, I could swear that I was anxious, but looking back and checking all my relationships, I think that I'm anxious avoidant. So this is also called disorganized attachment or fearful avoidant attachment. Okay. And I had no clue how to heal my insecurities without distancing myself. I keep thinking it's just better that I stay alone, but I dread the thought. What would you recommend to start breaking this pattern? Okay, so first, this describes anxious avoidant attachment is another term for fearful avoidant attachment or disorganized attachment, what I like to call a spice of lifer. And I call these individuals spice of lifers because they most poignantly experience the wide range of human emotion. They've often experienced the whole gamut. And so they usually call up within us, they mirror within us the aspects of ourselves that sometimes we're not willing to look at. And they usually, to my mind, have some wounding that speaks to a great calling. Okay, so I call these the spice of lifers because they bring us the spice of life. Now, if you suspect that you have this type of attachment style and you want to break a pattern of insecurity or start feeling more secure within yourself without resorting to distancing yourself, then there are a few steps that I would recommend here. And so the first is to acknowledge your attachment style and the impact that has on you and on your nervous system. Also recognizing the patterns that can create in your relationships and understanding how your anxieties and avoidant tendencies can manifest, right? So this is really a crucial first step. In my HIP communication formula, we call this decoding your conflict blueprint. Okay. And that's when we start to recognize there are actually 3 distinct patterns for partners that have insecure attachment styles. Now, the second thing is to take time to reflect on these recurring patterns or triggers and how those triggers are contributing to your anxiety or to your avoidance and the way you're responding to that. So in the literature, this is referred to as activating or deactivating strategies that seek to close the gap between you and a partner or to put more space between you and a partner. Okay. And so really just taking a mindful moment to breathe deeply and to take a pause and enact that self-reflection. Oh, what's going on here? What are the thoughts going through my head? What are the sensations I'm having in my body? And how am I feeling compelled to respond? Just that moment, that pause can provide valuable insights and also point you towards what are the root causes of the attachment impulses you might be experiencing. Now, thirdly, I recommend exploring and challenging What are the beliefs, the content of your thoughts, right? What are the beliefs that are popping up in that moment and driving either the anxiety or the avoidance, right? And then you want to work on developing a more balanced perspective, usually reframing your beliefs about relationships, vulnerability, intimacy, and the accessibility of love in the world. Okay. And then you want to, number 4, prioritize self-care activities that promote your emotional well-being, relaxation, and de-stressing. Because oftentimes triggers become particularly active when our body doesn't have an existing blueprint or template for what it means to relax. So especially for someone who has fearful avoidance, their system is usually on kind of a like is usually on high alert most of the time, kind of like a fan whirring in the background. And so they may be kind of hypersensitive to triggers. But if we can teach the body a template or a blueprint for what it means to relax in relationship to others, what it means to relax in even a distressing situation, then that is proactively addressing that kind of heated situation that might arise, right? And this can also help us to build a sense of strong self-worth, right? Because if we notice ourselves responding in with a cool head in a situation where we might otherwise struggle to maintain that equilibrium, then we start to build a sense of trust in ourselves and in our own agency, right? Our ability to be present and to master those triggers. And lastly, number 5, working on your communication and boundary setting. Usually, I would argue this is maybe the most important thing, because when you feel a need to pull away or reach for or scramble for something, it's usually because there's a distrust of a sense of safety in the relationship, but within the self, a distrust of the self's ability to handle some kind of attachment threat. And so that stems from struggling to understand boundaries and communicating typically from a more defensive position, right? So we want to work on those things to foster understanding, to foster more authentic and vulnerable connections. And that's also going to help you establish that sense of internal safety and control, which will allow you to sit with the discomfort in relationship to someone. Right. So I'll go over that one more time. So number 1, acknowledging your attachment style and the patterns it creates. Number 2, reflecting on those recurring patterns and how they contribute to your triggers. Number 3, challenging the underlying beliefs and assumptions that you're making, typically based on those triggers. Number 4, prioritizing self-care and proactively working with the body and the nervous system so that you can create a blueprint for relaxation and a sense of equilibrium and what's called emotional regulation in the moment. And number 5, working on your communication skills and healthy boundary setting. Okay. All of that is going to build a sense of trust in yourself, reassuredness, and confidence in your ability to navigate relationships without having to resort to deactivating or distancing strategies. Okay. Now, if you want to learn more about how to develop these skills more in depth, I do invite you to check out my upcoming live workshop series. This is a 5-day live communication workshop series. I'll include a link to that in the caption of this video. We're going to take a look at the biggest and most common communication mistake that I would say like 90% of people make without even realizing it. I'm gonna share one highly effective and crazy simple trick that is going to inspire your partners to care about your needs. I'm also going to share with you my 3-step HIP communication formula. And this also is going to inspire your partner to want to be your biggest supporter and champion. And we're going to talk about safe and soft strategies in communication, which help you deepen the intimacy with your partner based on their attachment style. So there will be a link in and around this video to learn more about that workshop series, and I invite you to check that out. So that was our first question. Just going to take a peek at our comments here. We have a question. I'm going to show this one. What if you've been seeing someone for a while and they're still sticking around to work it out with you, but you're still curious if they're cheating, even if they're doing what you need and want? So what do you do if you've been seeing someone for a while and they're sticking around to work it out, but you're curious if they're cheating, even if they're doing what you need and want? So the question is really more about It sounds like the question is really more about how do you start trusting? Like, how do you start trusting them? How do you start trusting the relationship? How do you trust their intentions? I don't know if they have cheated in the past. And when you say sticking around to work it out, if that's because they're trying to, repair with you after that, or if there's upheaval in the relationship and because of that you suspect there's cheating. So there's some missing information here that would make this a more relevant answer. What I will say is that whenever we are concerned about someone else's fidelity, usually it's about a fear of loss. It's about a fear of being hurt. It's about a fear of being humiliated, disempowered, taking advantage of. And distrust of someone else begins with a distrust of the self, right? Now, this is almost independent of whether or not they actually are trustworthy, because someone could lie to you or not lie to you. The negative effect of betrayal and distrust is that we start to distrust ourselves. So I might offer a reframe for you here, which is cheat on me or don't cheat on me. It doesn't affect what I understand to be my value and what I know I can bring to a relationship, right? And if you do cheat on me, then, the cake's on your face, because you've just missed out on an amazing opportunity to have deeper intimacy and connection with someone that shows up within their fullest authenticity. And now you've missed out on that opportunity with me, right? And I know that this is not a commentary on who I am and what I bring to the relationship. This is more about you and your internal narratives. And so I'm going to draw a boundary line here, and I'm going to move on to someone who can be forthright, who can be trustworthy, and whom I know that I can be more emotionally vulnerable and interested in a reciprocal relationship, right? Just knowing that it's not about you. Now, if they haven't cheated on you and they're doing all the things that you're asking and you're still suspecting them cheating, that is something that you've got to work on in your internal space. That's you not trusting yourself, right? That you will survive if someone cheats on you, right? That it doesn't have any bearing on your value or worth. So that's a narrative that is expressing itself through a concern about cheating, but that's just one expression. I'm sure that narrative is expressing itself in other ways too. Okay. So I would have you start to look at that, and also to look at, and to experience this as a gift, because if the relationship is bringing up concerns about cheating and there are no viable, uh, sensed or observed reasons for it in the relationship between you, then the relationship is mirroring back to you a dusty corner that you're ready to sweep out so that you can relax into a relationship and be trusting and experience that knowing and understanding of your worth and value, regardless of what somebody else does or doesn't do. Okay. I hope that that's helpful. Another question. Let's see. Are there upsides to growing up having to battle for earned security? I think it's made me a much stronger person, and I have a hell of a lot more grit than those that have a more balanced display of mentors. Okay. So, so on some level where we would probably need to define grit, right? But certainly growing up and having to battle for earned security can have some positive effects. So the experience of facing adversity and having to fight for security can foster things like resiliency and grit. It makes your desire grow, right? It makes your desire, it makes your wants, it makes the intensity of that energy grow. And because of that, it can make you stronger. It can make you more determined. It can make you more resourceful, more resilient in navigating life's challenges, for sure. Having to struggle for security can also cultivate a strong sense of self-reliance, right? You can learn to rely on your own abilities. You can become more autonomous and independent, and that can be valuable in a lot of different areas of your life. Overcoming obstacles can also instill a deep sense of accomplishment and self-confidence. When you've worked really hard to achieve something, when you've seen yourself butt up against struggles, make mistakes and fail forward and learn from those mistakes, that can give you a great sense of pride, satisfaction, and personal agency and mastery. So absolutely, right? And this can fuel a motivation to drive yourself towards success in a variety of areas. However, However, oftentimes our greatest strengths can also be our greatest weaknesses, right? And so it's important to note that while these aspects can, of course, be really positive, um, there can also be big challenges to this, right? There can be some downsides. So it can also create things like hypervigilant, mistrust, or difficulties in forming secure attachment relationships by creating opportunities to connect. You may start to adopt the attitude, if you want something done right, then you got to do it yourself, right? And so this grit becomes an excuse for not allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to delegate, to make space for somebody else to contribute to your well-being, right? You kind of hold on to this. Well, this is my greatest strength. This gives me my grit. I can't let go of it. But in fact, you've kind of evolved beyond it. So what you have to do now is take hold of what it has given you and allow those strengths to contribute to a new vision for yourself and your relationships in the future, right? I mean, ultimately, everybody's experience is unique, and the effects of battling for earned security can vary. But I would say it's just ultimately it is essential to reflect on your journey, right? And to learn how to, if you've been someone who's always had to do for yourself, learning how to relax, to surrender, to ask for help, to allow in is now the primary goal of to which you want to apply all that grit, right? So I hope that makes sense. Let's see, we have some other questions. What about friendships? I have a friend with avoidant attachment. Them distancing themselves and not responding or being reliable triggers my anxious attachment. Yes, this can absolutely happen in friendships as well, for sure. Some of us can compartmentalize, friendships, it doesn't actually affect you as much. Only in romantic relationships. Some of us compartmentalize this into our careers. Some of us function very well in the workplace, while for others, the attachment concerns bleed into the workplace environment as well. It's like their colleagues become like the dysfunctional family system again. It really just depends on your ability to compartmentalize. I did do a couple of reels on this topic, which you can see on my YouTube channel, as well as on my Instagram grid. We had another question here. Do you think extreme pickiness when dating could be due to being more avoidant? I'm more fearful avoidant and avoidant in the beginning stages before I start to feel comfortable. I never seem to find anyone attractive enough or interesting enough to want to see them again. Okay. So I would say extreme pickiness when you're dating definitely can be associated with an avoidant attachment style, although I've met many an anxious person who is also extremely picky. And this is often due to a need for control, a need for predicting outcomes, right? Unless it's exactly the way I think it should be, then I can't predict how the outcome is going to be, and then I might get hurt, and I don't want to do that. Right? Pickiness also can mean that you're excluding the imperfect, right? Which means that you won't have to suffer the flaws of imperfect human relationships, right? Especially if that's been particularly painful for you in the past, right? But the question specifically about avoidance. So avoidant individuals, they can exhibit things like fear of intimacy, fiercely defending their independence or autonomy, also a tendency to dismiss their own emotions. And those traits can contribute to developing high expectations, might argue unrealistic expectations when it comes to choosing a romantic partner. And so they might also harbor some limiting beliefs that fuel these high expectations. So for example, I need to find someone who is completely self-sufficient, right? Due to a strong desire for independence. These individuals may believe that a partner too should be totally self-reliant and not expect any emotional support or validation from them. And so that leads to a more dismissive attitude towards potential partners who show some vulnerability or who express a need for connection, right? Another limiting belief might be, I should only be with someone who never triggers my fears of engulfment or enmeshment, right? My fears of being smothered or subsumed by someone. And so this fear of being consumed by a partner often leads to a fear of being controlled, and that can lead to a preference for partners that give them a ton of space and independence. But this too can create some issues because then there's not a whole lot of glue keeping them together. It becomes more of like the romance gets kind of sucked out of the relationship, right? And also, it means that there's a sense of isolation and disconnect going on. Another limiting belief might be, I have to find someone who perfectly meets all my needs. And if we ever get into a conflict or an argument, that means that it's too much work and it's not worth it. Right. So there's kind of an unrealistic expectation that if the relationship is right, or if the chemistry is right, it means that there's never any conflict. And we all know that that's not the case, right? Arguments, when handled in a healthier, or we might argue more secure way, are actually served to deepen the intimacy between you because they shine a light on your differences. They shine a light on who you each are authentically as an individual and as a human being. And the benefit of that is you get to know more of who your partner is, and they get to know more of who you are. As long as we can see past our defensiveness, and as long as we can see past our own expectations for what we think reality should be, or what we think our partners should be, right? And instead, embracing them with love and generosity, knowing and understanding them for who they are, and listening to them when they tell you who they are, right? And so if we're not willing to do this, if we're not willing to show up with that air of generosity, it can make it really challenging for anyone to meet those impossibly high standards, right? And so it becomes a kind of constant cycle of disappointment or dissatisfaction in relationships. And all of a sudden we have a very pessimistic point of view, right? So again, these limiting beliefs, yes, they can contribute to an extreme pickiness, and they create a barrier to the emotional connections that might otherwise be established in a relationship. And of course, that creates a barrier to experiencing satisfaction and fulfillment in relationships. Right. So I hope that answers that question. I think we might have had a couple more. We have some on Instagram here. My avoidant boyfriend did not come to meet my friend who flew up to see him after a 4-hour flight. He came up with the excuse, not very believable. Could it be to that degree avoidant? Oh yeah, absolutely. I dated someone who had avoidance so bad that I bought him a plane ticket, and he didn't get on the plane. And rather than telling me that he didn't want to come, he was in the Navy, and he told me that his ship was on fire. Rather than just tell me, I don't want to come. So my sister, who was not willing to accept that, called the Navy and asked, is the ship on fire? And there was uproarious laughter in the background. No, ma'am, the ship's just fine. So there's a lot of lengths that some people will go to avoid just saying what they want or they don't want. Right? Okay. Is there a way to tell if the person you're dating is avoidant, not very affectionate, or is it that they're just not that into you and pacing themselves? So I think you got to give that a little time. It's hard to give you a distinct answer on that. Physical affection is very much a personal thing. Body boundaries can also be conflated with emotional boundaries, and often are. So not that that's good or bad or right or wrong, it just is. So the body is the first organizer of experience. You feel something because your body experiences it sensorially. So, physical affection, some people, and it's true that more often than not, our open hearts tend to be affection seeking. They tend to be dopamine and oxytocin seeking because of what epigenetics tells us about their gene expression. So it is true that folks that are more anxious and open-hearted tend to want more affection more readily, more quickly, whereas folks that have more of an avoidant disposition, epigenetics tells us that they tend to express serotonin. Their epigenetic expression is more around serotonin. So they usually need a little bit more space. Although sometimes it can be tied to when you have low serotonin, it increases, can lead to hypersexuality. So and obsessiveness. So sometimes this has been linked to avoidance and sex addiction, for example, but that's very different than affection, right? So I would say that's something you need to give it time. And then over time, you might express affection, or you might ask if it's okay if you express affection, and then see how they respond. And then you'll know that a bit more accurately. A fearfully avoidant friend that I'm intimate with also dates another girl. He said he thought of marrying me, sees himself married to me, but he shares more things with the other girl than me. Do they lie? I don't think that doesn't necessarily have to be a lie. So this is more about how you define relationship, how you define primary commitments, and maybe there's secondary commitments. I will say for individuals that struggle with avoidance, and in particular fearful avoidance, there's usually ambivalence, right? There's ambivalence, and there's also confusion around boundaries, right? So they may perceive like one person as, this is the person that I'm going to have my primary relationship with, which is in essence a more structured experience of relationship that I'm going to build my routines around. And then this is the person that's going to hold my emotional intimacy. And it is true that sometimes when we have more avoidant tendencies, we will split them because it's more comfortable. It alleviates the intensity of the relational intimacy and the emotional intimacy being connected. Similarly, sometimes avoidant partners will split emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy. Rather than having them be a combined thing, they will split them, and they'll have their friend that's like a partner but not a partner, and then they'll have their friends with benefits, right? And so all the emotional connection goes over here, and then all the physical connection goes over here, because when you spread it out, then it feels less intense, less committed, less overwhelming, right? So that does happen. That is a circumstance, and it could be with your partner there, but I would say it sounds like you would want to ask for much clearer definition around the relationship. What are the expectations? And if you are someone who does not want to marry someone who has another partner, maybe you are. Of course, we have non-monogamous relationships. There are polyamorous relationships. But if you are someone who's more interested in a monogamous commitment, then I would definitely make sure that you express that now, right? Thank you. Oh, thank you for the $5. I really appreciate that. That's never happened to me before. First time for everything. Thank you. Okay, we have some more comments here. Let's see. I'm afraid of infidelity. Everything I read about avoidance is that they can cheat. I'm anxious and I don't know what to trust. I mean, everyone can cheat. Anxious people cheat too, because anxious people are validation seeking and attention seeking. So actually, it's been my experience that anxious people cheat more than avoidant people do. But both do it. So I wouldn't worry about that carte blanche. Everybody does it. So if you're going to worry about it, worry about everybody. It's for different reasons. Okay. So anxious partners, when they cheat, it's because they're seeking attention, they're seeking validation, and oftentimes it's to it can be to punish a partner who's not giving them enough attention and validation, and sometimes they on some level they want to get caught because they're hoping that in the display of possessiveness, jealousy, anger, that they will get attention through that experience, and they're hoping that will make their partner realize how much they want them and how much they need them, and that sort of stimulation will bring them together again. Whereas for a more avoidant partner, when and if they cheat, it's usually the opposite reason. They want to create more distance between you and them. They want to kind of put you in your place. They want to make sure you understand that you're not actually that close. You're actually over here, and your importance is not as much as you think it is. So don't think that you're so close to me, kind of thing. It's more about creating distance, and it's less about trying to affect an emotional kind of what's called an activating strategy, but some method of bringing them close together through some kind of emotional stimulation. They have very different ways of viewing infidelity. I've met avoidant partners who will be unfaithful as a means of keeping themselves emotionally separate from a primary partner because it feels too overwhelming to be committed to one person. And there are avoidant individuals who would never cheat because they can't imagine the time, effort, and energy it would take to have to do that. It's already draining enough to have to do it with one person. Can you imagine trying to do it in a sneaky way behind someone's back with yet another one? It's like, whoa, way too needy, right? The idea of having more than one partner is like exhausting. So we can't really make carte blanche statements like that, right? And of course, on the other hand, we have anxious partners who would never ever cheat because they are so all in with one person that they are fiercely loyal, right? The idea of cheating is just revolting to them. So we can't really make carte blanche statements about attachment style infidelity because attachment styles can be expressed on both sides of that. Couldn't possibly imagine, and then they would do it because it's an extension of that. It's a spectrum. I hope that makes sense. So I had a couple other questions I wanted to make sure I addressed. Let's see. Are there upsides to, oh, we already read this one. This was about grit. Let's see. Do insecure people really heal in relationships with secure people, or do they just not trigger them? And if so, is being with a secure person the only way to heal? Okay, so being with a secure person creates, let's say, a container or a holding environment or a safe environment in which you can practice evolving your attachment style without feeling so triggered all the time, right? It allows you to come back to baseline a little bit more readily because you don't have a partner that is responding in a way that you are responding, right? Like that's caught up in the narratives, caught up in the nervous system stimulation, caught up in the old stories that are lit up when you experience a trigger, right? So secure person can create an opportunity, secure person can create a container, secure person can create a safe space, but it is up to you to be doing the work, right? It is up to you internally to be navigating that sense of self-trust, to be working with what's called auto-regulation, meaning learning how to sift and sort and organize your emotions effectively so that you can then co-regulate with your secure partner, meaning attune to them, be able to respond to them, contribute to a relationship that becomes that third thing between you, which also becomes a resource for you in time that will help you auto-regulate, right? The co-regulation between you becomes a resource to help you auto-regulate, and then your own ability to regulate yourself becomes a resource to harmonize the relationship and your partner, right? Now, do we need a secure partner in order to find a sense of security, or are all us single insecure folks just up shit's creek? I 100% believe that is not the case. That I believe that attachment security is defined as an autonomous thing. When we see secure relationships, that's a manifestation of attachment security, but that does not define attachment security. So if we were to define attachment security as having a secure relationship, then number one, that's a really impermanent solution, right? And number two, that creates a ridiculous dependency on other people and things we can't control, right? An unrealistic dependency, I would say, an inappropriate one. Because when we have two people looking to the other to create security for them, then that's going to lead to a lot of chaos and confusion. It's like trying to share one oxygen tank, right? And they will start to dysregulate each other. So in my work, we focus on developing what I like to think of as self-sovereignty, which is reorienting your attachment security in relationship to your own eternal spirit, I take a spiritual approach to these things. Okay. And so, in other words, this auto regulation, this ability to organize ourselves emotionally, it's achieved by orienting your attachment proximity, meaning your sense of attachment security, towards your own source energy, to your own spirit, to your own higher knowing. And practically, that's translated into connecting with nature, right? Connecting to a larger community of like-minded individuals, deepening your spiritual practices through transcendent experiences. And those are a lot easier to accomplish than you might believe. So it is this internal sense of spaciousness and expanded awareness that allows you to access your own vital life force energy, and your access to, and trusting that you have access to that energy at all times. That is ultimately what makes you feel a sense of security in any relationship and in any circumstance, if you ask me. And this is what connects you to something larger than yourself, larger than you and your partner, right? Something that transcends the sort of back and forth between you and someone else, right? And that's what leads to what I consider to be an ascended partnership, which is when the energy stops being linear, bouncing back and forth between two, and instead now you've both got your own oxygen tanks. And so now you can move in multiple dimensions, and you can deep dive if you want to, right? It's generative. There's something that contributes to a collective experience that becomes larger than yourselves, larger than just the dyad, right? What's going on between the two of you. It contributes to a collective experience. So that's why in my work, I assume a psycho-spiritual perspective. And when we work with attachment security, it is about healing that relationship between you and the essence of self, you and your own higher knowing. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Let's see. I had one more here. I saw that one before. What are your thoughts on ENM and attachment? Less sharing of one oxygen tank and more focusing on how you show up in each connection. So I don't know what ENM stands for. An individual with each person. How to prevent shutdown after opening. Prevent shutdown after opening. So this is parts work, right? So when you feel a shutdown after opening, what's happened is you have expanded your energy, you've expanded your awareness, you've opened your heart, and now there's going to be usually a younger part that pops up and says, whoa, we are overexposed here. We need to shut that down, right? Before the worst case scenario happens. And so oftentimes you will experience this as a constriction in your body, as cyclical negative thoughts, as just a flinching, a tightness, a rigidity, a reliance on external structures to organize you, to contain you. And so that is a sense of urgency about things, right? A sense of right, it's got to be right, it's got to be wrong, there's no in between. And so when that happens, it usually means that there's a protective or managing part that has been awakened. So I'm referring to internal family systems theory right now. I have a video series on this topic on my YouTube channel. It's called Healing the Wounded Inner Child. And so what happened is there's a wounded inner child inside of us, and that child represents typically an attachment wound or injury that you had at one point, and it will hold the painful feelings around that, whether it be shame, anxiety, fears of failure, worthlessness, helplessness, so on and so forth. And so the child holds the painful feeling, but there will be another part that keeps the child in check, and that's what we call a protective part. And usually they are parts that are more like an inner critic. They kind of keep you in line by telling you not to do things so that you don't try and fail. Or we have another protective part, which is referred to in IFS as a firefighter. And this is the firefighter says, oh, you don't have to think about that. Just swipe right, right? Or you don't have to deal with that. Just go out and get a drink. Or you don't have to do that. Let's just eat this Ben & Jerry's and binge watch Netflix right now. So it's the part that dissociates and distracts you from whatever the inner child is feeling, right? It's a numbing agent. pun intended. So when you feel the closing up, it's a subconscious part, managing part that is trying to take over because feels the opening up and the surrender feels threatening. So now is time to work with your parts. If you feel that happening, if you feel a sense of urgency, question it. Question it. Start working with a professional that can help you draw lines around those experiences. And this is why creative arts therapy is so powerful, and why I'm a creative arts therapist, is because when we work with this in very visceral, experiential ways, where we're literally pulling that feeling out and putting it on the page, now we've drawn lines around it. When you can look at something, touch it, feel it, change it by making a mark, you're building boundaries around that experience. And once you build boundaries around that experience, whether it's an emotion, a thought, an impulse, once you externalize it and you draw a line around it, guess what? It's not you anymore. Meaning you've just created space between this thought, feeling, or impulse that used to overwhelm you and that you used to call your identity, your personality, a trait that you just have, right? It's not that anymore. Now it's something you choose to have or not have. You choose to listen to or not, which means you've differentiated your observing perspective from it, right? So this is why parts work is so incredibly powerful, especially for establishing boundaries and therefore trust in yourself. So if you close up after opening up, you don't trust something about yourself, right? So the work now is working with your parts to integrate them and allowing that to lead towards a deeper sense of trust in yourself. I hope that helps. Okay. So let's see. The last question I have here: if a partner has a complaint over a significant period of time, what is the healthiest way to deal with it, particularly after 6 years? Okay. So I am going to answer this from the perspective of conflict management versus conflict resolution. Okay. So how do you know if a relationship concern is best dealt with through conflict management or conflict resolution? Let's say that's the question here. All right. So maybe I should ask those of you who are here on the call, how many of you have experienced a long-standing issue or problem with a partner and nothing that you seem to do, say, or try, either one of you, seems to resolve the issue, right? Let me know if that sounds like something you've experienced, just like a thumbs up or me, or raise your hand in the comments there. So when a partner has a complaint after a significant period of time in a relationship, and in this case, the inquirer is suggesting 6 years, then it's really important to understand this distinction between conflict management and conflict resolution, okay? So conflict management, this refers to the ability to navigate disagreements and conflicts in a constructive way, while conflict resolution is finding a definitive solution to resolve the issue at hand so it doesn't happen again, okay? So you don't have to deal with this again. Now, in the context of a long-term relationship, it's important to realize that not all problems are going to be solvable, right? In fact, John Gottman's research, who's done 44 years of studying long-term relationships, identifies that there are 2 types of problems in relationships, and these are solvable and perpetual problems, right? So solvable problems, they tend to have clear solutions, they can be addressed, and they will be resolved. Whereas perpetual problems, on the other hand, are typically ongoing issues that do not have a definitive solution, but they can be managed and understood better. And I will say, in my 15 years of experience, oftentimes when we see partners struggling with attachment wounding, this is when we start to see perpetual problems popping up. Okay. So when we are faced with a complaint after several years, okay, it's really crucial to try to approach this from the perspective of management first. So that means there's going to be active listening, there's going to be expressing empathy, validation, mirroring, and open communication. Okay, really seeking to understand the other person's concerns, validating their feelings as affirming and validating their feelings as important. Also expressing a willingness to work with the issue together with a spirit of generosity. Okay. And so This includes things like saying I statements, right? Compromising and working on negotiations. I will add that I statements, typically you want to make sure that you are using them through things like safe or soft strategies based on attachment style, because some partners, when you start using I statements and attempt emotional honesty, actually feel increasingly threatened and become increasingly defensive because of how they are interpreting the way you're expressing yourself. So things like safe and soft strategies are super important. Understanding the difference between an evaluative statement and a real feeling, right? We often express ourselves through evaluations, but they're not actually feelings. So for example, and that's a problem because evaluations are going to push a partner away, whereas real feelings are going to pull them closer. So for example, people often hear people say things like, I feel abandoned, I feel rejected. Those are evaluations. You are evaluating what someone else has done to you. It's not a real feeling word. It's not a real expression of how you're feeling. What is the feeling of abandonment? What is the feeling of rejection? I feel hurt. I feel sad. I feel hollow. I feel empty. I feel disconnected, right? So it sounds simple, but this is going to make a huge difference if you're trying to connect with someone, especially in a situation where you're dealing with conflict management. Okay. You're going to need someone's buy-in in order for them to accommodate an unsolvable problem. And if you're going to express yourself with words that distance yourself from your own emotions and try to lay the blame on someone else, you're not going to get that buy-in, right? So now, on the other hand, if the complaint falls into a category of a solvable problem, you want to focus on conflict resolution. And this usually requires collaborative efforts, right? Where you both agree on a solution and you both contribute to it, right? So when you're seeking assistance, it's likely that you want to work with someone who's going to facilitate communication around these issues, someone who understands the impact of attachment styles on communication and also understands the impact of attachment styles on your filters and your perception and limiting beliefs, because those are the things that are going to, let's say, influence whether the problem becomes a solvable one or a perpetual one, right? So I hope that that makes sense. And if you want assistance with this, this is something we talk a lot about in my online courses about communication. And with that, I might actually tell you a little bit more about that. So next week, just as a reminder, I'm going to be doing a live workshop series. It's called Love and Ambition, Romantic Communication Strategies for Professional Women. So if you're a professional woman and you are interested in learning more about this, the impact of attachment styles on communication, and how to inspire your partner to want to resolve your issues and or to meet your needs and cultivate those loving relationships, I highly recommend that you check it out. There will be a link to the info page in the caption of this video. I'm really looking forward to diving in. This is the one and only time we're going to do this series. We're going to be turning it into a self-directed course after this. So if you are interested, I recommend taking advantage of this opportunity. And with that, I just want to say thank you to all of you that joined me here live. It was a pleasure answering your questions. And again, I will add some links in the captions here for further learning. And if more questions come up, please feel free to comment below the replay. I collect all questions and take all feedback into consideration when doing future live streams like this. And so, yeah, I wouldn't want you to miss out on that. So let me know your thoughts, and I will be back next week.